when I gave my life to building the future. My closest friend betrayed me, and everyone watched the collapse in silence. And then, it started on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind where the office hums with familiar patterns. But even before I'd finished my coffee, something felt out of alignment, like a low hum only I could hear. I was standing near the elevator, scrolling through unread emails, when the revolving doors spun faster than usual, and in stepped this girl, maybe 22 at most, wearing bright white sneakers that squeaked slightly against the polished marble floor, paired with a cropped blazer that looked like it had been lifted directly from some influencer's styling hall. I watched, frozen, as she walked with the kind of confidence that felt studied but practiced, like she had rehearsed this exact moment in a mirror, long strides that carried her straight past the front desk, without so much as a glance toward security. No badge, no escort, no clearance swipe, just a casual wave at the receptionist who didn't even question it. What knocked the breath from my chest wasn't just her presence, but the fact that Don, our CEO, the same man who barely managed eye contact with anyone below VP level on a normal day, stood waiting for her near the visitor sign-in kiosk. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades of watching him move through this building, I saw him smile in a way that wasn't just polite, but almost reverent, like he was looking at the future itself wrapped in glittered nails and oversized sunglasses. The way she tilted her head, as if she'd just remembered where she was, and flashed him a grin that could have been rehearsed for the cameras, made my pulse pick up, though I couldn't have said why yet. I stood there, takeout coffee in one hand, laptop bag digging into my shoulder, watching her glide through security like she owned the building, and for a second I thought she might, the way no one else seemed to question her right to be there. They crossed the lobby in silence, moving in sync like a scene from some corporate promotional video. And it wasn't until they were 2 steps from the elevator that she finally acknowledged me, turning with a precision that made my skin prickle, cocking her head slightly to the side, as if sizing me up before speaking. Her voice was sweet, but carried a note that didn't quite match the smile. "You must be Rachel," she said, as if we were already acquaintances, and I, still off balance from the entire scene, could only nod, mouth dry from more than just the bitterness of my coffee. Then came the line that would replay in my head for nights afterward, a sentence delivered lightly, as if it meant nothing, when it meant everything. "You're the one I'm replacing, right?" My brain struggled to catch up, and for a second, I actually forced a laugh, trying to convince myself this had to be some kind of misunderstanding, because there hadn't been a single word about transitions, let alone replacements. She shrugged, like it was no big deal, and her tone lifted into a sing-song cadence that made it clear she was enjoying the confusion she'd just planted in my head. "Oh, maybe I wasn't supposed to say anything yet," she added, glancing at Don with a wink that made my stomach knot. "For now, I'm just shadowing Uncle Don." Before I could gather a response, the elevator doors opened, and the two of them stepped inside, leaving me rooted to the spot, the hum in my chest growing louder, a vibration that felt like the first signal of a system about to crash. As the door slid shut, I stared at my reflection in the polished steel, my own name badge suddenly feeling heavier around my neck, the weight of something ending before I even understood what had begun. I barely had time to collect my thoughts or finish my now cold coffee when a message popped up on my screen, not from a person, but from the system itself. No subject, no sender, just a time and a location. Executive Conference Room B, immediate. That room wasn't used for casual updates or planning sessions. It was where decisions got made, the kind that didn't leave room for discussion. I straightened my blouse, grabbed my notebook, and walked down the hall, each step echoing louder than it should have in a building that usually pulsed with energy by this hour. The door was half open when I arrived, and inside I saw Don seated at the head of the table, hands folded so tightly his knuckles had gone pale, eyes locked on the surface of the table like he was waiting for it to offer him the right words. Beside him sat Kelly from HR, face stripped of the usual warmth, the kind of expression people practice when they need to look neutral while delivering bad news. And then there was Sierra, sitting where the CTO usually sat, legs crossed, tablet glowing in her lap, like she had already claimed the space as her own. No one spoke as I entered, and the quiet felt so thick I could feel it pressing against my skin. I took the only empty chair, shut the door behind me, and tried to focus on keeping my breathing steady. Don cleared his throat, and the tone of his voice told me everything before the words even reached me, clipped and too careful, as if reading from a script that had been approved by legal. Rachel, you've been with us a long time, longer than most people stay in this industry, he began, and I nodded slowly, unsure whether this was meant as praise or preparation. He continued, each word more practiced than the last. But companies evolve, technology changes, and leadership must reflect the future we want to build. The silence after was long enough for the air itself to feel heavy, and then came the words I would never forget, delivered like a final verdict. It's time for us to embrace new energy. Sierra will lead the transition. My mind couldn't catch up to the meaning at first, the edges of reality blurring as I looked from Dawn to Kelly to Sierra, who smiled that tight, practiced smile of someone handed a prize they didn't even know how to unwrap. So this is a restructuring? I heard myself ask, though my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Kelly leaned in, voice soft but unyielding. This isn't about performance, Rachel. It's about alignment with our evolving brand vision. The kind of phrase people use in memos when someone disappears overnight. Don slid a folder across the table like it was a menu, his expression unreadable. We've prepared a generous exit package, he added, as if generosity was supposed to dull the blade. My hands felt cold as I opened it and saw my name, my role, my termination, signed by 3 people, the third name hitting harder than all the others combined. Eric, the friend I'd mentored, stayed late with during server rollouts, shared coffee runs and inside jokes with for years. The ink on his signature was barely dry. I closed the folder carefully, stood, and asked, am I allowed to say goodbye to my team? Kelly gave a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, but we'd appreciate it if you kept things neutral. Neutral. As if nearly 2 decades of work could be reduced to something that wouldn't upset anyone. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just gathered my things, the room fading behind me as I stepped into a hallway that suddenly felt unfamiliar, every corner and surface transformed by the knowledge that I no longer belonged here, though somewhere deep beneath the shock, something colder was taking root. Precise and patient. I walked out of that building feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted, not just the job, but the identity I had carried like armor for 19 years erased in the space of a single, rehearsed conversation. I drove home in silence, the kind of silence that feels louder than any noise, every block of the city blurring together until I barely noticed pulling into my driveway. The box of my things sat untouched in the passenger seat, as if even my belongings were unwilling to acknowledge what had happened. Inside, the air felt stale, heavy with the weight of unfinished conversations and the echo of Sierra's voice calling my life's work and inheritance. I dropped the keys on the counter, slid the box onto the floor beside the kitchen table, and stared at it like it might bite if I came too close. I couldn't bear to unpack it, not yet, not while my pulse still raced and my thoughts tangled in the knots they'd left behind. Instead, I powered up my old personal laptop, the one I'd kept offline and untouched by company systems. The one I used for late-night ideas and sketches when the official channels felt too rigid. The screen flickered to life, and with it came the calm that always settled when I was looking at code, at logic that didn't lie or posture or pretend. I pulled up my archive of legal correspondence, scrolling until I found the thread I half remembered, the one that had sparked so many uneasy conversations with the Centra's legal team. The subject line glared at me from the top of the list, Intellectual Property Transfer Agreement 2019. I clicked, heart pounding now not with anger, but with something sharper, colder, purpose starting to harden beneath the shock. There it was, the last message I'd sent, refusing to sign without revisions that protected my authorship, my rights to the architecture I had built from sleepless nights and endless iterations. They'd never replied, never followed up, as if they assumed I'd cave eventually under the pressure of deadlines and launches. But I hadn't, and there was no signature, no agreement, nothing binding my system to their ownership beyond assumption and arrogance. I opened the attached contract, saw the empty signature field beneath my name, and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Without that signature, they didn't own what they thought they owned. The core of Accenture's logistics platform, the predictive engine that ran their supply chain, still belonged to me in the ways that mattered. And in their rush to replace me, to paint over the foundation I'd laid with shiny branding and empty slogans, they had forgotten to lock the door behind them. I dug deeper, found the meeting notes from a tense October session, a summary from their own legal team warning that without explicit agreement, my independent development prior to integration remained mine to contest. My mind raced, calculating risks, outcomes, leverage points. This wasn't revenge taking shape. It was truth finding its footing, the realization that they had built their empire on ground they didn't own. I logged into the test environment I had created years earlier during a stretch of chaotic migrations, a sandbox that mirrored the production architecture without interacting directly with it, hidden under a dummy node I'd named R_Ghost. A quiet observer no one else remembered existed. The dashboard loaded, the data streaming in as if I'd never left, as if the system itself still recognized me as the architect it answered to. I scanned the logs, heart sinking as I saw what Sierra had already begun to change, the core files renamed to suit her aesthetic, critical integrity checks stripped out. Safeguards dismantled in the name of modernization or simplicity or some shallow vision of innovation. She didn't understand what she was touching, what those layers of logic protected against. She was playing at engineering on a stage built for precision, turning the controls of a machine she couldn't comprehend. And no one was watching, no one was stopping her, because they believed she was the future they needed. I could have shut it down right then, a few lines of code, a simple command to freeze the system or scramble the logic beyond repair. But I didn't, because this wasn't about destruction, not yet. This was about leverage, about setting the stage for choices they didn't even know they were about to face. I opened the fallback kernel module, a failsafe I had embedded years ago during a crisis that no one else even knew about, a safeguard designed to lock the system in place if it detected unauthorized tampering at the root level. I rewrote the condition logic with steady fingers, heart quiet now with the clarity that comes when purpose clicks into place. If my credentials were removed, the cascade lock would trigger, halting every process, freezing the architecture in a state that could neither be exploited nor undone without me. No password, no recovery, no workaround, only my biometric confirmation to reverse it. I encrypted the changes, buried them under layers of decoy comments, and exited the node, leaving no trace that anything had been altered. Before I logged out, I compiled the activity logs, screenshots of Sierra's changes. Her directory paths, her user ID attached to every reckless edit. I saved it all into a single file, named it legacy.pdf, a record of what she had touched, what she had broken, and what would inevitably fail. And then I sat back, the hum of the machine filling the room, the first sense of control returning like breath after holding it too long. They thought they had erased me, revoked my access, stripped me of my title and my place. But they didn't understand that the system didn't belong to their paperwork or their approvals. The system knew who its architect was, and it would answer to no one else. The message came the next morning, sterile and final. No greeting, no explanation, just confirmation that my access had been permanently revoked effective immediately. I stared at the screen, fingers still, heart steady. They believed that email marked the end of my story, that removing my credentials erased my power. But what they didn't realize, what they had never considered, was that the foundation they stood on had been designed to respond to that exact moment, to protect itself from those who didn't understand it. They pulled the trigger, but they hadn't seen the bullet yet. And somewhere deep beneath the weight of what they thought they'd taken, I felt the shape of what came next beginning to form. The hours after that email felt strangely quiet, as if the world had paused just long enough for me to hear my own thoughts sharpen, every sound in my apartment muted beneath the steady hum of calculation. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect after betrayal that deep, because anger burns too fast, and I needed the kind of fire that smolders slow, deliberate, controlled. I made tea out of habit, chamomile because it steadied my hands on mornings when everything else felt unsteady, but I didn't touch it, not even after it cooled, because my focus was locked entirely on the screen in front of me. They believed that message marked my end, the final nail driven quietly into the architecture they'd stripped from my title and my access. But they hadn't thought beyond the paperwork or the revoked credentials, hadn't even bothered to question what lived beyond the systems they thought they owned. 3 years earlier, During a chaotic stretch of overnight migrations, I had created a test environment that mirrored the production system's heartbeat, a sandbox I built late one night while waiting for vendor patches, a place to simulate load, test logic, and preview risk without disrupting live operations. I registered the node under a dummy identity that no one questioned, R_ghost, buried deep enough beneath layers of permissions that even IT audits never flagged it, because it didn't push changes or request access to live deployments. Just watched, quietly recording everything that pulsed through the veins of the infrastructure I had built. I logged in, the dashboard blinking awake like it had just been waiting for me to return, data streaming through branches that Sierra had already touched, rewritten, stripped of safeguards she didn't even realize were the only things standing between her vision and disaster. I clicked through layer after layer, watching the evidence pile up, her edits sloppy and unchecked, critical failsafes renamed or deleted entirely, scripts she modified without staging or audit trails, no backups, no version control, no safety net between their clients and the chaos she was accidentally engineering. The cascade lock I'd buried waited quietly beneath it all, its trigger condition updated, dormant but ready to freeze every process if they pushed me out of the system entirely, a line they had just crossed. They believed they could replace me on paper, revoke my credentials, and that would be the end of it, but they never understood that architecture isn't a title or a nameplate or a line item in HR records. Architecture lives in the choices only its creator can see, in the lines of code buried too deep for anyone else to notice, in the logic that answers to no one but the mind that shaped it. Before I logged out, I assembled the evidence they'd given me, compiled screenshots of every critical edit Sierra made. Every timestamp, every path, every reckless change tied to her credentials, packaged it all into a file I named pulseinheritance.pdf, a quiet record of the disaster they were about to walk into. I opened the Copyright Office's anonymous reporting portal, attached the file, and included the white paper I'd written in 2020, timestamped, and stored offline, the blueprint for the system they were now parading as Sierra's invention. I didn't add commentary, didn't waste words on explanations or accusations, because the truth was already written in the code, and the system would speak louder than any argument I could make. When I hit submit, there were no fireworks, no dramatic confirmations, just a small message saying the report had been received, and that was enough. I leaned back, exhaled, and let the silence of my apartment settle around me again. The call came not long after, a number I didn't recognize, crisp and professional, but with a tone that suggested the person on the other end wasn't in the habit of wasting words. Ridgepoint Tech, a smaller firm out of Denver, the one that had been sidelined when Accenture won the last big contract, now reaching out because they'd heard about my so-called transition, because they'd seen what was starting to crumble behind the shiny launch plan Sierra was parading around the industry. They offered me what Accenture never did: full architectural control, clean budget, equity stake, no red tape, no borrowed vision, just the chance to build something from the ground up without interference, without politics, without having to translate logic into marketing slogans. I accepted before the tea on my table had cooled completely, because in that moment, I knew exactly what they were really offering: a chance to create, to reclaim, to shape something they couldn't take away again. And as I shut the laptop, I felt the first real calm I'd known in weeks, because the next chapter was already beginning. The days that followed felt like stepping into clean air after years of breathing recycled exhaustion, the kind that presses on your ribs without you realizing it until it's gone. I arrived in Denver with nothing but my personal laptop, a single duffel bag, and the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, surrounded by people who saw value in what I could build rather than just what they could take. Ridgepoint Tech wasn't flashy, didn't waste time with glossy presentations or hollow slogans. Just clean workspaces filled with engineers who cared more about the integrity of systems than the politics of titles. By the second week, I had spun up a private node in their secure cluster. No legacy bloat, no borrowed code, just fresh architecture written line by line, cleaner and stronger than anything I'd been allowed to design at Accenture. I worked in silence. No interruptions, no back-to-back status meetings demanding updates for people who wouldn't understand them. Just the steady hum of creation as the skeleton of the new platform took shape under my hands. But as I built, I kept a quiet eye on what I'd left behind, monitoring the pulse of Accenture's infrastructure through the sandbox node they had forgotten existed, watching as Sierra's reckless edits stacked on top of each other, changes made without understanding their consequences, safety checks dismantled in the name of modernization, and audit logs disabled in a bid for cleaner optics that only left them blind. The cascade lock I'd buried waited silently beneath it all, unseen, untouched, a safeguard designed to trigger only when their arrogance reached its inevitable end. The day of the Pulse Core launch came faster than I expected. A glossy event in San Francisco streamed live across every major tech outlet. Sierra stepping onto the stage in a crisp white suit, oversized and ill-fitting, probably chosen to make her look like the visionary she pretended to be. I watched from the quiet of Ridgepoint's new operations wing, mug of coffee in hand, no bitterness in my chest, just a calm certainty that the system she was about to present wasn't hers, wasn't stable, wasn't ready. She spoke in rehearsed lines about digital natives and next-generation logistics. Words that sounded impressive to the untrained ear, but rang hollow to anyone who understood the weight of real architecture. When she clicked to launch the demonstration, I felt it before I saw it, the hesitation in the system, the fraction of a second lag that signaled everything I knew was coming. The screen behind her glitched once, then flooded red, error code scrolling faster than anyone on that stage could read, vendor load predictions collapsing into timeouts and script failures, live fail reports flashing where seamless coordination should have been. The audience gasped, junior executives reaching for their phones, interns glancing at each other in panic, while Sierra froze, caught between the persona she had crafted and the reality she couldn't control. On Twitter, hashtags began to roll before she even finished stammering through her apology. Pulse Core meltdown and Sierra crash trending before the technical team backstage could cut the feed. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, because this wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about the system doing what it was designed to do, protecting itself from misuse in the absence of the one person who could have held it steady. Accenture's stock dropped 13% in the first 2 hours. 3 major clients announced contract suspensions by nightfall, and internal sources leaked that legal teams were drafting breach notices before the day was done. I knew the call would come, and when it did, it came from Don himself, voice tight and careful in a way I'd never heard. The tone of a man used to control now forced to ask for help. He spoke my name like an offering, like he thought saying it softly would undo the damage, and asked if I would consider consulting to stabilize what was left. I let the silence stretch long enough that I could hear the strain in his breathing, then answered with the only truth that mattered. I told him I didn't owe him anything, that I cared only that the system was finally free from those who never deserved it, and I hung up before he could say another word. But the part they didn't see coming, the twist they hadn't accounted for, was that the board moved faster than they did, ousting Don before the dust had even settled, installing Eric as interim CEO in a last-ditch attempt to salvage the company. The same Eric who had signed my exit papers now found himself dialing my number, offering not just a return, but full architectural control, ownership, and authority to rebuild. And as I stood in the Denver office, Ridgepoint's skyline glowing against the night, I realized I didn't need to destroy Accenture to win. I only needed to let them hand me the keys on my terms, merging their remnants with what I had already built, ensuring that this time my name would be carved into the foundation, not written in pencil on the surface. I took the call, not with triumph or anger, but with the clarity of someone who knew the value of what they held, and as I spoke, the future finally began to take shape. The final stretch of this storm didn't come with the fireworks people expect when they imagine revenge. It arrived in quiet negotiations behind closed doors where the real power plays happen, where titles are stripped of meaning and only leverage remains. Eric's voice on the phone cracked beneath the weight of everything collapsing around him. The friend who once shared late-night coffee runs now begging for a lifeline I could give or withhold without blinking. I didn't answer right away because I wanted him to feel the same silence I'd carried when I packed my box and walked out of that building they thought I'd never see again. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, no bitterness left in it, only purpose hardened by everything they'd done to try to erase me. I told him that saving Essentra would cost them more than they ever expected, not in dollars, but in control, in legacy, in surrendering the fantasy that they could ever own what they had tried to take from me. The merger proposal arrived within 48 hours, thicker than it needed to be because lawyers love their page counts. But the parts that mattered could be distilled to a single truth. Ridgepoint would absorb Essentra under new leadership, my leadership, with the combined platform rebuilt under my design, clean and untouchable. I didn't gloat when I signed. I didn't smile when the announcement hit the news feeds. I didn't even pause when industry outlets tried to frame it as an unexpected alliance rather than what it truly was, a quiet takeover wrapped in corporate language to soften the blow. I walked through the newly branded Ridgepoint Global Systems headquarters, the same building that once bore Essentra's name, and felt no nostalgia, no regret, only a sense of completion that hummed beneath my skin. The same walls, the same marble floors, but now they answered to a different architect, one who had been underestimated until the very moment she rewrote the future. But just when I thought the last page of this chapter had been written, the twist I hadn't anticipated arrived, not in the form of another call from Eric or an email from some panicked junior exec, but in a message forwarded by an old colleague who still watched the industry feeds for signs of trouble. Sierra had resurfaced, not in the way people expected, not with an apology or a quiet exit to obscurity, but with a new startup announcement backed by a European venture group, promising to launch what she called the next revolution in predictive logistics, using frameworks suspiciously close to the designs I had documented long before she ever set foot in Essentra's lobby. The press release was filled with recycled jargon and empty promises, but what made my breath still wasn't her audacity. It was the realization that she'd learned nothing, that she believed rebranding stolen ideas would shield her from the consequences that had already started to close in around her. I didn't react with fury or fear. I didn't storm into meetings or flood inboxes with warnings. I simply opened a clean document on my laptop, laid out the timeline, the evidence, the overlap between her so-called innovations and my protected architecture, and submitted it through official channels that don't care about marketing spin or venture backing. I left it at that, because the machine I'd built didn't need me to shout for it anymore. It knew how to defend itself. And when the news broke weeks later that her funding had been frozen pending investigation, I felt no triumph, only relief that this time the system worked as it should, protecting what was real from what was built on illusion. The unexpected ending wasn't her downfall, or the merger, or even the quiet way Essentra's name faded from the industry map. It was what came after. When I realized that for the first time in 2 decades I wasn't carrying the weight of defending what I'd built. I stood at the top floor of the new headquarters, looking out over a city that had once felt like a cage and now felt like possibility, and understood that the real victory wasn't in reclaiming what they tried to take. It was in knowing I no longer needed their validation to keep building. As I stepped into my office, sunlight pouring through the glass, the hum of a future I had designed filling the space, I whispered the words that had carried me through every sleepless night, every betrayal, every fight for recognition. Still standing, still building, and this time on my terms.